Elon Musk uncovered something shocking on live television that nobody saw coming. Millions in taxpayer money had vanished, and every trail led back to Letitia James. She thought no one would ask questions, but when Elon revealed the truth, the entire room fell silent. What happened next changed everything. It began quietly. No press, no cameras. Just a stack of documents that landed on Elon's desk through a connection inside the New York state government. At first glance, they looked like ordinary financial paperwork. Budgets, grant allocations, and spreadsheets full of numbers. But Elon doesn't just skim, he studies. One small column caught his attention. It showed hundreds of millions of federal dollars, money meant for public services, being funneled into vaguely named programs like Equity Compliance Task Force and Restorative Outreach Units. No descriptions, no receipts, just money flowing out with little explanation. The deeper he dug, the stranger it got. The same addresses kept appearing. Some programs listed 0 staff, others had no contact information. One organization had received over $20 million in a single year and didn't even have a working website. That's when the question formed in his mind. Where was the money actually going? And who had signed off on it? Elon didn't go public right away. Instead, he reached out to someone with experience and determination, Pam Bondi. She wasn't new to political battles, and she didn't hesitate. Within a day, she confirmed what Elon suspected. These weren't isolated mistakes. They were patterns. And those patterns pointed directly to New York Attorney General Letitia James. Pam raised a simple question. Was federal money being used to push political agendas under the cover of justice and equity? She took that question straight to Congress, and surprisingly, Congress listened. A public hearing was scheduled, witnesses were called, and Elon Musk agreed to testify. That's when the media woke up. Headlines exploded with his name. Some praised him, others mocked him, but no one ignored him. The richest man in the world was about to expose what he believed to be the misuse of federal funds by one of the most powerful state officials in the country. And Letitia James? She remained completely silent. No statements, no defense, nothing. What Elon discovered went far beyond New York. It affected every state receiving federal funding. It affected how your tax dollars were spent. The full story, the part that makes people uncomfortable, wasn't public yet. That's what the hearing was for. And what Elon revealed inside that room left even seasoned politicians in shock. The hearing wasn't supposed to be explosive. It was scheduled like any routine oversight session, probably forgotten within a week. But Pam Bondi had other plans. She walked in with a calm expression, holding a thick folder in one hand and a flash drive in the other. Her tone was measured, her posture steady. But behind the scenes, she was fully prepared. Every document had been verified, every slide cross-checked. "This isn't about politics," she began. "This is about money, your money, and what's been done with it." The room stiffened as she clicked a remote. The first slide appeared, a screenshot of a wire transfer from a federal education grant redirected to a consulting group that listed its address as a UPS mailbox in Brooklyn. No contact phone number, no financial disclosures, just a $3.2 million payment labeled Equity Curriculum Review. That money was meant for classrooms, Pam said quietly. It went to a company with no staff and no students. Another click, another slide. a mental health outreach grant redirected to an organization that hosted workshops on colonial healing through sound baths. The cost? $870,000. The reach? Just 74 participants. More slides followed. A housing assistance program that awarded nearly $9 million to a nonprofit founded just 2 months prior with no previous record of operations. And then the name appeared on screen. Letitia James. Every document Pam showed had been authorized under James's office. Signed, approved, and in some cases, fast-tracked. Some tried to interrupt. Representatives raised objections about relevance, but Pam stood firm. This wasn't about ideology. It was about oversight. It was about whether one person, backed by political buzzwords, had turned federal funds into a personal agenda. For months, New York taxpayers had no idea where their money was going, she said. Now we're finding out, and we're just getting started. But something was missing. The link, the proof that these programs weren't just inefficient, but intentionally misleading. That's when she revealed the twist. Elon Musk will be here in 1 hour, and he's bringing data that none of us have seen. The room changed instantly. This wasn't just a policy dispute anymore. It was a warning shot. Pam had laid the groundwork. Elon was about to bring the receipts. When Elon Musk walked into the chamber, everything changed. Reporters leaned forward, phones came out, and committee members whispered to each other, already speculating what he might say. He didn't bring a team of lawyers or handlers, just himself, a laptop, and a focused look. "I'm not here to give opinions," he said calmly. "I'm here to show numbers." He opened his laptop and connected it to the screen. The first graph appeared. Color-coded, simple, and impossible to ignore. It showed a sharp spike in the federal funds sent to New York over the past 3 years. Nothing unusual there. But then the second graph appeared, showing how that money was distributed. Instead of public services or infrastructure, the largest portion, over 31%, was redirected to something labeled social equity reform. No federal agency defines what that means, Elon explained. There's no oversight, no clear metrics, but it's where the money is going. He clicked again. This time, a map of New York lit up with data points. Each one represented a program or nonprofit that had received at least $1 million in funding. Dozens had the same mailing address. Others shared phone numbers or board members. It looked less like a public investment network and more like a shell game. One point stood out. A group labeled Access for All had received $12.4 million. But when Elon's team checked their physical location, they found nothing but an empty office suite and a locked door. The questions came fast. Was this fraud? Was someone personally benefiting? Elon didn't accuse anyone directly, but he raised one eyebrow and said, "When multiple programs receiving millions share the same P.O. box, something's wrong." He continued showing IRS reports, real estate filings, and contract duplicates. All public records, nothing classified, just data that no one had bothered to connect before. Then he dropped a number that shook the room. Over $26 million in taxpayer funds redirected to entities that either no longer existed or never fully operated. Some members tried to push back, asking if this wasn't just sloppy paperwork or overcomplicated bureaucracy. Elon smiled slightly. Maybe. But what's more likely? That dozens of different groups all made the same mistake, or that someone wanted it to look like a mistake. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't emotional. But every word carried weight. "I'm not here to say who's guilty," he concluded. "I'm here to say the data doesn't lie." When the hearing resumed after a break, the first thing everyone noticed was the empty seat. Letitia James had been invited. Her nameplate was there. But her chair remained vacant. Her office had declined to send a representative. No comment, no excuse, just formal notice that she would not participate. That silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. Pam Bondi turned to a different set of documents, ones that hadn't been part of Elon's testimony. "Let's talk about outcomes," she said. "Let's look at what these programs actually did." She clicked her remote again. The screen showed an education program in upstate New York that had received nearly $8 million over 2 years to improve minority graduation rates. But the numbers showed those rates hadn't improved at all. In fact, they had dropped. Another example. A public health initiative designed to serve underserved communities received over $5 million in funding. Yet they only held 3 events. No permanent staff, no medical professionals on payroll, just volunteers, social media flyers, and vague community healing circles. "This isn't about whether equity matters," Pam said clearly. "It's about whether the people in charge are doing what they promised. And the answer is, they're not." By now, even the skeptical committee members were leaning forward. One congressman asked if the failure of these programs was due to poor management or something more intentional. Pam answered carefully, "If it's poor management, we need to know who's responsible. And if it's intentional, we have a bigger problem than anyone expected." She paused. "It's not enough to say you care about justice. You have to prove it. And wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on broken programs while children go without proper schools and families live in shelters? That's not justice." The room went still. One committee member finally said what everyone was thinking. If Letitia James had nothing to hide, why isn't she sitting here right now? No one answered because, by that point, everyone knew the question didn't need a response. It needed a reckoning. Elon had one more piece to share, and this time it wasn't just about money. It was about people. He stood again and opened a new file. It wasn't a spreadsheet or chart. It was a map of New York City with dozens of red markers across the boroughs. This address received $2.4 million under an inclusive housing initiative, Elon said, zooming in on one marker. But it's not a housing facility, it's a hotel. And the entire building was leased out, not to families, not to citizens, but to undocumented residents. He showed another address, same story. Millions in federal housing grants redirected to temporary lodging centers with no public accountability, no entry logs, no oversight, and no transparency on who was staying there. Then he showed a timeline. Over the past 18 months, New York had quietly increased spending on temporary housing by over 340%. Not through public announcements or council votes, but through backdoor contracts signed by state offices, including Letitia James's department. "What does that mean for the average taxpayer?" Pam asked. "It means you're paying for services that were never approved by your representatives," Elon replied. "And in many cases, you're paying for people who aren't even legally counted in the system." He showed one final slide, a list of tax-funded programs labeled as community enrichment that had quietly adjusted their eligibility requirements. They no longer required proof of residency, no ID, no legal status, just a name and a form. And yet, the funds kept flowing. "Are you saying these programs were intentionally designed to bypass federal regulations?" Pam asked. Elon paused. I'm saying they were structured in a way that makes it impossible to know who's benefiting and nearly impossible to track where the money ends up. By now, even networks that had downplayed the hearing were broadcasting live. The numbers were too large, the evidence too clear. If this is happening in New York, Pam concluded, what makes us think it's not happening in other states too? No one had an answer, but the question hung in the air. And outside that room, governors and lawmakers around the country were already making phone calls because Elon hadn't just exposed New York, he had opened a door, and now the rest of the country was about to look inside. By the next morning, the hearing had made headlines across every major network. Clips of Elon's testimony were everywhere. News segments, social media, even late-night shows trying to spin it with humor. But the facts weren't funny, and not everyone was happy. Letitia James still hadn't spoken publicly, but her office finally released a short statement calling the hearing a political stunt designed to distract from real issues. It didn't address the missing funds, the failed programs, or the data. Just a vague dismissal paired with a warning. Our work continues. Behind the scenes, the pushback grew louder. Political figures began defending James and accusing Bondi and Musk of targeting minority communities. They called it an attack on progress and an assault on social justice. Some media outlets claimed Elon's numbers were misleading, though none offered alternative data. Pam wasn't rattled. She went on national television and kept it simple. This isn't about race or politics. It's about billions in federal funds going somewhere, and we don't know where. She held up one of the documents Elon had shown. Clear, unedited, signed. If this same spending pattern were found in a red state, the outrage would be immediate. So why is no one asking questions when it happens in blue ones? That hit a nerve. The next morning, a well-known political commentator accused her of undermining trust in public institutions. But Pam didn't back down. She asked a new question. If we can't question where our tax dollars are going, what kind of democracy do we actually have? Meanwhile, Elon returned to work as usual. He didn't post much, just one short message. The data is public. I just connected the dots, but the noise didn't stop. Editorials, op-eds, heated roundtables. Some demanded further investigation, others tried to shift the topic. One major outlet claimed Elon's involvement was inappropriate for a tech CEO. Still, no one could point to a single factual error in his testimony. That's what made it all so uncomfortable. The evidence was real. The money had moved. Letitia James remained silent. And now, governors in several states had quietly begun their own reviews of how federal grants were being distributed. Pam had started a conversation that couldn't be shut down, and Elon had made sure the world was listening. It didn't happen overnight, but within days of the hearing, the tone in the media shifted. At first, most outlets had treated the story like political drama. Elon stirring the pot, Pam playing to her base. But now, something had changed. Too many people were asking questions. Too many documents had surfaced. The usual dismissals weren't sticking. One morning, a major outlet released a quiet correction in the corner of its homepage. It admitted that one of the nonprofits Bondi mentioned had indeed dissolved months earlier, despite still receiving over $1 million just last quarter. That same day, a local New York journalist published a bombshell report. They had visited 3 addresses listed in the grant filings. 2 were shuttered. 1 didn't exist at all. Suddenly, it wasn't just a Bondi and Musk story anymore. It was a funding scandal. The headlines changed. Where did the money go? New questions surround Letitia James' office. Elon Musk may have a point after all. Reporters pressed state officials for answers. Most received vague statements about audits and review processes, but none would say on record that the money had been spent correctly. Still, Letitia James remained quiet. No press conference, no interviews, just silence. If the Attorney General of a state can't come forward and explain her office's actions, Pam said in one interview, she shouldn't be in that office. It landed hard. Even lawmakers who had dismissed the hearing began to waver. Some suggested follow-up investigations. Others called for independent audits. Some stayed completely silent, hoping the news cycle would move on. But it didn't, because Elon wasn't done. That week, he posted side-by-side comparisons of funding data from New York and Florida. Florida's allocations were clear, tracked, and reviewed every quarter. New York's were scattered. "This isn't about states," he wrote. "It's about systems." It went viral. People began tagging their governors, asking for transparency. State treasurers across the country started fielding questions they weren't used to answering. Taxpayers were waking up, and the press had no choice but to follow the story where it was going, straight to the offices that had been hiding the truth. A week after the hearing, the pressure reached a boiling point. Congress had stayed mostly silent, but the public hadn't. Town halls were packed, local radio stations buzzed with discussion. Governors in 5 different states were calling for independent audits of their federal spending. Then, without warning, Letitia James broke her silence. She walked into a press conference flanked by 2 advisors. No smiles, no jokes, just a stack of papers and a tight expression. "I've done my job to the best of my ability," she began, "and I will not be intimidated by billionaires or political attacks." But what followed wasn't a defense. It was a deflection. She didn't address the empty buildings, the ghost nonprofits, the wire transfers, or the missing documentation. Instead, she called the hearing a dangerous precedent, designed to discourage equity-focused initiatives. When a reporter asked directly if she could account for the $26 million Elon had flagged, she paused. "We are reviewing all claims internally," was all she said. Pam responded within hours. "This isn't about discouraging equity. It's about discouraging corruption. If Ms. James wants to defend her record, she's welcome to appear before Congress under oath." That clip went viral. By now, public opinion had shifted sharply. Polls showed that even among moderate voters, trust in how federal funds were being used had dropped by double digits in just 1 week. Then something unexpected happened. A bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced the Federal Funds Transparency Act. It would require states to publicly disclose all recipients of federal grants and provide quarterly reports for every program. Elon didn't comment on the bill, but he posted a single emoji, a flashlight. The message was clear. Letitia James had tried to weather the storm, but the tide had turned. It was no longer about her. It was about every official who thought no one was paying attention. Because now, the whole country was watching. What happened next didn't make as many headlines, but it mattered more. Inside state capitals across the country, quiet meetings started happening behind closed doors. Budget directors were called in. Agency heads were questioned. Suddenly, the usual rubber stamp approach to federal grants was no longer safe. In New York, several mid-level staffers from Letitia James's office were quietly reassigned. One stepped down entirely. No reason given, no farewell memo, just gone. Meanwhile, Pam returned to Florida. But the calls didn't stop. Lawmakers wanted her input. Governors asked for her review. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She had become a watchdog. "We can't change the past," she said in one interview. "But we can make sure every dollar moving forward goes where it's supposed to." Her message resonated. The Federal Funds Transparency Act gained momentum. By the end of the month, over 60 House members had signed on, Republicans and Democrats alike. No one wanted to be seen as standing in the way of oversight. As for Elon, he never sat for another hearing. He didn't need to. His role was never to stay in the spotlight. It was to shine a light where others wouldn't. And now that the light was on, it wasn't going away. Several investigative reporters followed up on Elon's documents. They traced funds from New York to out-of-state accounts. Some ended up tied to political action committees, others vanished completely. The findings created wave after wave of public pressure. Letitia James still hadn't returned to Congress or answered questions. Her office insisted they were committed to equity and accountability. But the numbers didn't back it up. And the public knew it. Voters demanded itemized spending reports. News anchors asked sharper questions. Even federal agencies started reviewing their grant guidelines. This wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a movement. What began with one whistleblower, one billionaire, and one determined attorney had shaken the system. Not through outrage or scandal, but through proof, hard numbers, real evidence. It left the political world with a question it wasn't used to answering. What happens when someone finally connects the dots on live TV? The question hung in the air from the very start. What exactly had Letitia James tried to hide? It wasn't just one payment, one nonprofit, or one program. It was an entire structure built around good intentions with no accountability. When Elon testified, he didn't accuse her directly, but the data told the story. Letitia's office had quietly redefined how federal money could be used. Programs meant for housing were rerouted to hotels with no oversight. Educational grants went to consulting groups with no teachers. Public safety funds funded messaging campaigns, some political in nature. All of it was buried under noble-sounding titles like equity initiatives, restorative justice, and centered investments. They sounded worthy, but there was no proof they worked. What Letitia James had tried to hide was simple. Failure wrapped in the language of progress. The money wasn't stolen. It was worse. It was spent on things that couldn't be tracked, measured, or defended when someone finally asked where the results were. Pam had pulled back the curtain. Elon had turned on the light. And the American people saw what had been hidden. By the end of that month, 10 states announced reviews of their DEI spending. 3 governors ordered independent audits, and Congress passed the initial version of the transparency bill by a wide margin. Letitia James kept her job, for now. But her political future remained uncertain. One thing was clear. The days of quiet mismanagement were over. Because now, when someone says, "Trust the system," people ask for proof. What started as one hearing became a wake-up call. And all it took was someone finally asking the right question. Where did the money really go?